"Please, take it off quickly," she whispered through cracked lips, her voice trembling in the desert wind. A lone cowboy knelt beside her, dust swirling like smoke between them. What he held wasn't jewelry or pride. It was the iron shackle biting into her ankle, glowing hot from the sun. As the chains fell away, the truth rose from the dust. Who had bound her? And why did the mark on that chain match the brand on his own wrist? The desert had never felt this silent. By the time the cowboy found her, the heat had already turned the sand into glass. The woman lay half-buried beneath a broken wagon wheel, her skin streaked with dust, her eyes the pale color of stormlight before rain. He hadn't seen another soul for 2 days, only crows and the wind. When she stirred, whispering that single plea, it struck deeper than any bullet. He slid his knife beneath the rusted iron clasp. The metal hissed as it met air. Each twist of his wrist sent a jolt of pain through his own scarred hand, the one branded years ago in a mining camp that no longer existed. The sound of the chain dropping to the ground echoed like a church bell in a ghost town. She didn't thank him. She only stared. Between them hung a silence thick with questions neither dared to ask. Her torn dress and the wagon's emblem told him she'd come from the same territory he'd sworn never to cross again. Land ruled not by law, but by debts and signatures written in blood. He thought he'd escaped it. He was wrong. A distant thunder rolled across the valley, not weather but hooves. The cowboy glanced toward the ridge where the dust plume rose, already knowing what it meant. Someone was coming for her, maybe for him too. He slung his canteen toward her, then took one step back, torn between running and standing his ground. "They'll kill you if you stay," she rasped. He almost laughed. "Ma'am, they already tried." The first shot cracked before the echo of her words faded. The bullet struck the wagon, scattering splinters into the burning air. He reached for his revolver, slow, deliberate, as she struggled to rise. Whatever story bound them had just begun, and every answer waited on the other side of that dust storm. The wind shifted just before the next bullet came. It hissed past the cowboy's ear and buried itself deep in the sand beside the broken wagon. He dropped flat, dragging the woman with him, the two of them rolling into the dirt as a cloud of red dust exploded around them. Somewhere up the ridge, a rider cursed. Then the echo of hooves faded into the storm-colored horizon. The cowboy stayed still, eyes narrowed against the grit. His revolver lay half-drawn from its holster, cylinder stiff from sand. He counted silently, heartbeats, hoofbeats, the clatter of loose stones. Years of war and worse had trained his ears to recognize when death hesitated. Now it hesitated above them, uncertain. Beside him, the woman's breath came sharp and uneven. Her ankle bled where the shackle had burned her skin raw, the metal's ghost still etched into flesh. She pressed a hand against it, wincing but refusing to cry out. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "They'll come back." He gave a short nod. "Then we'd best be gone before they do." She tried to stand, but her leg buckled. He caught her under the arms and lifted her gently to her feet. The weight of her was nothing compared to the silence pressing down around them. From his vantage, he could see 2 horses cresting the far ridge. Scouts, maybe bounty men, maybe worse. Whoever they were, they'd seen the smoke from the wagon long before he did. The world out here had no shortage of men paid to chase debt. He led her behind a cluster of basalt boulders, crouching low. The scent of burned metal lingered where the shackle had fallen. Her dark hair clung wet to her cheeks, her eyes flicking toward the ridge like an animal born to flee but too weak to try. "What do they want with you?" he asked. Her jaw tightened. "What they always want. What belongs to them." "You belong to no one," he said. She gave a dry laugh that turned into a cough. "You sound sure for a man with the same mark." He froze. "You saw it, when you cut the chain." The scar on his wrist throbbed under her gaze, the crooked brand burned there years ago by a foreman who believed labor could buy a soul. He flexed his fingers, half wanting to hide it, half daring her to look longer. "I earned mine digging silver out of rock till my lungs bled," he said. "They paid me with fire. You?" Her eyes lowered. "My father signed paper he didn't understand. The bank took our land, then took me. I was collateral until I ran—" He said nothing. The desert didn't need words to explain cruelty. It carved them into bone. A sudden crack split the air. Rock chips stung his cheek. Another shot from the ridge. He shoved her down and fired back twice. The echo rolled for miles. One rider toppled from his horse and the other turned tail, galloping out of sight. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. She looked at him differently now, not with fear, but something like disbelief. "You could have left me," she said. "Could have," he answered, reloading with practiced calm. "Didn't." He rose and offered her a hand. "Can you walk?" "Long enough," she said, though her leg trembled. They moved along the canyon edge, following the line of dying mesquite. The sun sank behind a curtain of storm clouds, painting the sand blood red. Each step left tracks that the wind hurried to erase. After a mile, they reached the remains of an old telegraph station, nothing but splintered beams and the rusted bell that once called riders in from the trail. He pushed open the door. It groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Inside, the air was cooler, the smell of dry paper and dust thick enough to taste. She sank onto a bench, exhaustion stealing the last of her strength. He rummaged through what was left of a storage chest and found a tin canteen half filled with stale water. She drank greedily, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she said softly. He shrugged. "Storm's coming. We wait till night, then move." Lightning flashed far off, white veins across a purple sky. He watched it for a long time before speaking again. "When you said they'd come for you, you sure it's just money they want?" She hesitated. "Money's what they use for truth, but the truth's older than any coin." Meaning they don't want me dead. Not yet." The wind rattled the station walls like bones in a box. He checked his gun again, more from habit than hope. Outside, the world grew darker. He could feel the storm pushing against the canyon, promising rain, promising change. The woman leaned forward, her voice barely a breath. "You could still leave." "They won't chase you for me." He looked at her, eyes hard but not unkind. "They will if I don't finish what I started." "And what's that?" He holstered the revolver and pulled his hat low. "Undoing every chain they ever forged." A distant roll of thunder answered him. The sound wasn't sky this time, it was hooves, returning faster, more of them. He glanced toward the broken window, jaw tightening. "Get ready," he said. She stood, pain forgotten, resolve burning where fear had been. Outside, the rain began to fall in heavy drops, each one striking the earth like a drumbeat of war. The canyon breathed heat even as the clouds gathered above. When the first rumble of thunder rolled, it felt like the land itself groaning awake. The cowboy pushed the woman toward the shadow of a fallen bluff, the kind of place that kept men alive long enough to regret it. Behind them, the riders' torches flickered on the ridge, small flames chasing two silhouettes into the storm's throat. She limped, leaning on his arm, her breath ragged. "There were more of them before," she said between steps. "Men who wore badges once, men who stopped wearing them when the banks paid better." He didn't answer. The wind carried voices, hard and certain. He could tell by their rhythm these weren't drifters or raiders. They moved like men on orders. "Lawmen without law," he muttered. "The worst kind." They reached a slope where the canyon narrowed into a throat of rock. The walls pressed close, echoing every heartbeat. He guided her into a cleft no wider than a doorway. The air smelled of wet iron and sage. "Stay low," he said, "and don't speak unless you have to." She nodded, pulling the torn shawl tighter around her shoulders. Rain streaked down her face, washing blood and dust into the earth at her feet. In the lightning's flash, she looked older, not by years, but by miles. The cowboy crouched at the opening, revolver ready. He counted 6 torches now, weaving between the boulders like fireflies. Their leader rode at the center, coat snapping in the wind, a badge glinting dull against his chest. The others flanked him, 2 ahead, 3 behind, too many for a straight fight. The officer's voice carried across the rain. "You've made trouble for good men, stranger. Turn her over, and maybe you'll ride out breathing." The cowboy's thumb brushed the hammer. He didn't move. "You're a long way from good men," he called back. Lightning cracked again, and in that flash the officer dismounted. His face was pale, handsome once, now cut by years of compromise. "She's government property," he said. "Bank's claim was sealed with blood and seal. You break that chain, you break the law." The cowboy spat into the mud. Law's already broken. The officer's smile didn't reach his eyes. You can't rewrite what's written, boy. Paper owns the world now. Paper burns easy, the cowboy replied. For a moment neither spoke. Then the officer gave a small nod. His men dismounted, rifles gleaming wet in the torchlight. The first shot came not from them, but from the ridge above. A ricochet screamed past the officer's shoulder. Both sides ducked instinctively. The woman gasped. Somebody else was here. The cowboy seized the chance. "Move!" he hissed, pulling her into the dark channel behind the cleft. They scrambled through the narrow gap as more gunfire erupted outside. Whoever fired from the ridge wasn't aiming at him. They were driving the lawmen closer. The tunnel twisted and widened into a hollow where water dripped from the roof. The sound masked their breath, the rain outside a muffled roar. She clutched his sleeve. "Who's helping us?" He shook his head. "No one helps for free." Another shot echoed, closer this time. A man's scream followed, short and final. Then silence, except for the rain. The woman sank to the ground, trembling. "I don't understand any of this. They said my father died years ago." The cowboy leaned against the rock, eyes on the tunnel mouth. Maybe they lied. Why? He turned to her, voice low. "Because a dead man can't sign over land." Her breath caught. "You think my father's alive?" "I think somebody's using his name, same as they used mine once." The truth hung between them like smoke. He'd seen it before, banks forging papers, soldiers forging orders, everyone pretending the system still meant something. Out here, survival was just handwriting with a different pen. Lightning flashed again, turning the canyon mouth white. In that brief glare he saw movement, a figure descending the rocks with the fluid certainty of someone who belonged to the wild. The outline was too slender for a soldier. A rifle rested easy across their back. He motioned her down. "Another hunter." "No," she whispered. "I know that walk." Before he could ask, a voice drifted through the rain. "You shouldn't have cut her loose, cowboy." The speaker stepped into view. A woman in a worn coat, face half hidden under a wide hat. Her eyes glowed amber in the lightning's reflection. The newcomer leveled her rifle without malice, as if it were an afterthought. "Who are you?" the cowboy asked. "She's my sister," the chained woman said softly. The rifle didn't lower. "And you've doomed us both." Wind howled down the canyon, scattering torchlight and rain into chaos. The lawmen's shouts grew faint, confused by the storm and the shots from above. The cowboy glanced from one woman to the other. Same cheekbones, same fierce stillness, but different kinds of pain. "You gonna shoot me?" he asked, "or help her walk out of here?" The rifle stayed steady. "Depends what you think walking out means." Thunder rolled again, close enough to rattle the stone under their feet. The sister looked past him toward the narrowing trail behind. "They're closing in from both sides. Only one way left," the cowboy frowned. "Which way's that?" She tilted her head toward the black gorge that split the cliff. "Down." The canyon walls seemed to close in with every heartbeat. Rain hammered the stone, spilling in thin rivers along the path as the cowboy and the two women crouched near the gorge's edge. The roar of water below was deafening, a sound that could swallow screams whole. The chained woman, her name still unspoken, clutched her sister's arm. "Down there, we'll die." "Maybe," her sister replied. "Maybe not. The river runs beneath the cliffs for miles. If we follow it, we might come out beyond the ridge. They won't track us through the storm." The cowboy peered over the ledge. The fall was long enough to break bones, but the river looked deep. He weighed the odds the way he'd once weighed bullets against breath. "You sure it doesn't end in a wall of rock?" The sister shrugged. "I've only ever thrown stones, not people." Behind them, shouts carried through the rain. The lawmen were close again, echoes bouncing from wall to wall, impossible to place. The storm had turned sound into a weapon. The cowboy turned to the women. "We jump now, or we die here." The chained woman shook her head, terror creeping back into her eyes. "No, you don't understand. They don't want me dead. They need me. I'm worth more alive." He frowned. "To who?" "To whoever bought my father's debt, whoever owns that seal." She reached into the torn folds of her dress and drew out a small, weathered locket. Inside, instead of a picture, was a pressed piece of parchment stamped with a red wax insignia, a coiled serpent biting its tail. The cowboy recognized it instantly. His hand went unconsciously to the scar on his wrist. "That mark?" She nodded. "Same as yours." Before he could speak again, a voice cut through the rain. "Drop your weapons and step away from the ledge." The officer and his men had caught up, silhouettes against the lightning. The badge gleamed like a shard of moonlight on his chest. The cowboy raised his revolver, eyes never leaving the officer. "I'd tell you to turn back, but I reckon you don't scare easy." The officer took a slow step forward, gun drawn but not raised. "She's not yours to save, son. You don't know what she's carrying." "She's carrying chains," the cowboy snapped. "I took 'em off. That's all that matters." The officer's jaw tightened. "You think freedom's a mercy? It's a curse when you don't know who you are." The sister moved closer to her sibling, rifle aimed at the officer's chest. "You've had your say," she said. "Now turn around before this canyon becomes your grave." The man laughed once, a dry, humorless sound. "So you shoot me, more will come. The bank always collects. Doesn't matter who holds the gun." Then he gestured toward the locket still in the woman's hand. "Ask her what's written on that parchment." "Go on." The cowboy looked to her, rain streaming down his face. "What's he talking about?" Her lips trembled. It's a bond, signed in my father's name, but the name on the other side—" Lightning exploded overhead, drowning her words in white light. When the thunder faded, a new sound followed, the crack of rifles from both sides. The officer dove for cover, his men scattering. The sister fired once, hitting one of the riders in the leg. The cowboy grabbed the chained woman and pulled her toward the cliff's edge. "Now!" he shouted. She hesitated. "No!" He met her eyes, voice raw. "You said they need you alive. Then this is the only way to make sure you stay that way." He pulled her tight against his chest and stepped into the void. The wind tore the breath from them as they fell, rain whipping like needles. For a heartbeat, the world was only motion, falling, spinning, praying. Then they hit the river. Cold swallowed everything. The shock ripped the air from his lungs. He kicked hard, dragging her up, the current twisting them like rags. The roar of water filled his ears, until even thought became sound. When they surfaced, she gasped, clutching his arm. "Where's my sister?" He looked up toward the cliff, but saw only rain. No silhouettes, no gunfire, just the storm closing over the ridge. The river carried them, tumbling through narrow bends. Once he slammed against a rock and tasted blood. Still he held her, forcing their heads above water. At last the current spat them out into a wider basin, where the storm's edge was already fading. The world felt suddenly too quiet. He dragged her onto the muddy shore, both of them shaking from the cold. She coughed, pressing a hand to her chest. "You saved me again?" He sat beside her, chest heaving. "Don't thank me yet." She looked at the locket still clutched in her hand. The wax had softened from the water, but the mark remained. "That serpent," she whispered. "It's older than the bank. My father said it belonged to the first traders who came west, men who sold more than land." "What did they sell?" he asked. "Names," she said, "and souls." He stared at the locket, a memory stirring behind his eyes. Flashes of a ledger, a man's voice calling him number 17, the smell of burning parchment. He thought he'd buried that life long ago. Now it had crawled out of the dust to claim him again. The first light of dawn spread pale across the desert, soft as dust on glass. The storm had left the river swollen and angry, its surface littered with branches and memory. The cowboy crouched beside the fire he'd coaxed from damp wood, flame trembling like a secret in the breeze. Across from him, the woman sat wrapped in his coat, eyes fixed on the locket that had nearly drowned with them. Steam rose from her hair as the sun touched it. "You think she's alive?" she asked at last, voice rough with cold. He didn't answer right away. His hands worked the fire, feeding it slivers of dry bark. "If she's half as stubborn as you, then yeah, she's alive." The woman nodded slowly, gaze drifting toward the fog still clinging to the opposite bank. Somewhere behind that haze, the canyon waited, holding its dead and its secrets. She touched the locket again, thumb tracing the cracked wax. My sister believed in the old ways, she said. The earth keeps what it's owed. Maybe it'll keep her safe. The cowboy stared into the flames. The earth don't keep anyone safe. It just buries what it can't forgive. For a while they listened to the river. The sound was steady now, like breathing. The air smelled of wet clay and pine resin, life returning after ruin. He rose and checked his revolver. 2 bullets left, 1 chamber empty. We'll move when the sun climbs higher, he said. Water's too cold to cross again. We'll follow the bank till we hit the flats. Toward the town, he nodded. If we're lucky, there's still a road there, maybe a horse left behind. Luck's not something I've had much of. He gave her a wry smile. Then maybe it's due. They broke camp soon after. The mud sucked at their boots as they climbed a narrow trail cut into the bluff. The sun burned off the last of the fog, revealing the wreckage of the night. A path of broken rock and fallen trees leading back toward the canyon. No riders followed. Not yet. Halfway up the trail, the woman stopped. Wait. He turned. She was staring at something in the dirt, hoofprints, deep and fresh, headed downhill. They found another way around, he muttered. We keep moving. But she didn't move. Her hand tightened around the locket. No. These tracks, they're hers. He knelt to look. The horse's stride was lighter, the pattern of the shoes different from the others. He exhaled slowly. Could be. She's alive, the woman whispered. She must be following the river, same as us. Or being followed, he said. We can't wait to find out. They pressed on, the trail widening into a flat stretch of scrubland. The sun rose higher, harsh and unblinking. Sweat darkened the cowboy's collar. The woman limped but didn't complain. By noon they reached the remains of a telegraph line stretching across the plain. The poles leaned like drunks, wires hanging slack between them. In the distance, something gleamed, metal, low to the ground. The cowboy raised a hand to shade his eyes. Looks like a wagon. They approached cautiously. The wagon lay half buried in sand, 1 wheel missing, the rest rusted to the axle. Inside, they found a small chest cracked open, its contents scattered. Scraps of paper, a ledger bound in leather, and a stack of letters sealed with the same serpent insignia as the locket. The woman picked one up, her hands shaking. These are contracts, names, dates, signatures. My father's among them. He flipped through the ledger. Page after page listed debts, but not in coin. Each entry described something else. Labor, silence, bloodline. This ain't banking, he said. It's ownership written polite. Her eyes met his. You think my father signed this willingly? No man signs away his daughter on purpose. He paused, closing the book. But a man in debt signs whatever lets him sleep one more night. She sank onto the wagon step, shoulders heavy. Then all this, everything, was just ink and lies. Not lies, he said quietly. Paper truth, that's worse. She turned the locket in her palm. If my father's alive, they're keeping him because of this, aren't they? Because of what he knows. Seems likely. Then I have to find him. He studied her face. Tired, determined, older than her years. You barely made it out last night. If we go back, there's no coming out twice. I don't need twice, she said. Just once more, to end it. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of smoke. The cowboy stiffened. Someone's burning brush. They both looked east. On the horizon, thin columns of smoke curled upward, too straight, too even to be wildfire. They're signaling, he said. For who? He didn't answer. He could already see movement between the plumes, riders, faint but growing clearer in the glare. The woman stood, tucking the locket into her pocket. Then we'd better finish before they do. He tossed the ledger into the fire pit they'd left behind. Flames licked up, consuming the paper truth 1 page at a time. The serpent seals curled and blackened as the first ashes rose, and he turned to her. We follow the smoke. That's where they'll keep him. That's where this ends. The wind shifted again, scattering embers across the sand like dying stars. She looked at him, eyes bright with fear, defiance, something he almost recognized. Then let's go finish it, she said. He gave a single nod, checked the gun at his hip, and started walking east. The sun at their backs threw their shadows long across the desert, two dark figures moving toward the place where the smoke met the sky. The smoke led them east, through a valley, cut from rust-colored stone. By the time they reached the source, the sun had begun to fall, and the air trembled with heat. What remained of the camp stood like the skeleton of a memory, charred beams, torn canvas, the bitter scent of burned oil. The cowboy halted first, motioning for the woman to stay behind. He crouched low, scanning the ridges. No movement, no sound but the buzz of flies. The fire had died hours ago, yet the ground still radiated warmth. "Someone burned this to hide something," he said. The woman joined him, her gaze fixed on a blackened wagon wheel half buried in ash. "Or someone," she whispered. She knelt and brushed away soot until her fingers found a fragment of cloth, blue wool, the same shade as her sister's coat. Her breath caught, a sound more pain than surprise. The cowboy placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Don't draw conclusions too quick. Could be anyone's coat." But they both knew better. The fabric was singed, torn by a bullet. No blood, no body, just a coat, left behind like a promise. He rose slowly, eyes narrowing on the ground around them. Tracks crisscrossed the soot, some fresh, some washed out by the earlier rain. Boot heels, horseshoes, and smaller prints, bare, uneven, someone running. "She made it out," he said. "Look here, these tracks cut east before the storm hit. Whoever torched this camp came after. Then we can still find her," he nodded once, "if we move fast." They followed the tracks along a dry creek bed, winding between slabs of sandstone that glowed red in the setting sun. The air grew cooler as evening deepened. Coyotes called from somewhere beyond the ridge, their cries lonely and sharp. The woman limped but refused to slow. "Why burn the camp?" she asked. "If they wanted her alive." "Because she took something they wanted more," he said. "Paper, evidence, maybe truth." "You think she found more contracts?" He shook his head. "No. Something older. Something worth killing to erase." After an hour, they reached a clearing where the creek widened into a shallow pool. In the mud near the water's edge lay a rifle. The sister's, unmistakable, the barrel bent from impact. Nearby, hoofprints circled the pool, then veered away toward the north. The woman dropped to her knees beside the rifle, fingers tracing its stock. "She fought." "Yeah," the cowboy said softly, "and bought us time." He scanned the horizon. Far to the north, the smoke still rose in thin lines, too organized for a campfire. A signal again, call and answer, like telegraph pulses. Whoever commanded those riders wasn't chasing blind. "Whoever runs that mark," he muttered. "They've got more than guns. They've got communication." She looked up. "Then we can't outrun them." "No," he said, "but maybe we can outthink 'em." He crouched near the water, stirring mud with the toe of his boot. "See this?" She followed his gaze. Mixed among the hoofprints were deeper impressions, metal plates like those used on freight wagons. "They're moving heavy cargo," he said. "Means they've got a base close by." She frowned. "A base?" he nodded. "A place to store ledgers, goods, people. A place where debts get collected and erased." The word erased hung in the air like smoke. "Then that's where they'll take my father," she said. "Or where they already have him." The wind carried a sound, distant, rhythmic, mechanical. At first it was faint as a heartbeat, then it grew, resolving into the steady clang of a hammer striking metal. The cowboy stiffened. "Forge," he said. "They're branding something." They followed the noise through a narrow pass, emerging onto a plateau scattered with old mining equipment. The hammering came from a low stone building in the center, its chimney belching dark smoke. Shadows moved inside, 4, maybe 5 men, and hanging from a beam above the doorway, a new iron brand cooling in the evening air. The serpent, freshly forged. The woman's hand gripped his arm. "That's their mark." He nodded grimly. "They're still making more." They crouched behind a fallen cart, watching as 2 men dragged a wooden crate from the building and loaded it onto a wagon. The lid slipped open for a moment. Inside, stacks of sealed ledgers, wax gleaming red in the firelight. The cowboy's jaw tightened. "That's every debt they've written." "If we burn those," she said, "we end it." He studied the scene, counting weapons, angles, exits. 5 men, maybe 6 if one stayed inside. a single guard by the horses. "Maybe," he said, "but we do it smart. No one walks out of there if we go loud." She looked at him, eyes fierce in the fading light. "Then we don't walk out." Her words hit harder than he expected. She wasn't scared anymore. She was resolved. He drew a long breath. "All right," he said. "We wait till full dark. I'll take the guard. You get the wagon ready to roll. If your sister's alive, she'll head for that smoke. We'll meet her on the trail out. And if she's not," he checked his revolver, the click of the chamber loud in the quiet, "then we light this place up so bright even the dead can see it." As the last rim of sun sank below the horizon, the two of them melted into the shadows. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of distant thunder again, not from the sky this time, but from the steady beat of hammers forging more brands. The serpent waited in the fire, glowing red, hungry for flesh. From within the forge comes a faint cry, a woman's voice. The cowboy freezes. It's the sister. She's alive and she's inside. Night fell like ink spilling over the desert. The forge's fire glowed through the cracks in the stone walls, pulsing in rhythm with the clang of metal. Every strike sent sparks spiraling into the dark, brief constellations that died before they could name themselves. The cowboy waited until the hammer paused, until the men's voices inside drifted into laughter. Then he moved. He slipped through the shadows toward the tethered horses. The guard leaned against a post, head bowed, the orange glow of a cigar painting his face. One hand rested on a rifle. The cowboy drew his knife and stepped silently across the dust. The wind rose just enough to cover the sound of his boots. The blade flashed once, quick and clean. The guard sagged without a word, folding into the sand like a coat left behind. The cowboy dragged him into the dark, then motioned for the woman to follow. She emerged from behind the cart, her face ghost-pale in the moonlight. "You sure about this?" she whispered. "No," he said, "but I'm sure about them." They reached the wagon, still half-loaded with crates. The cowboy opened the back and saw what he feared. Not just ledgers, but chains, new, polished, ready. The smell of oil and iron thickened the air. Inside the forge, the laughter died down. A voice spoke, smooth, measured, educated in a way that didn't fit the desert. "Cool it slow, gentlemen. The mark needs time to settle in the flesh." The cowboy froze. He knew that voice. It had haunted the edges of memory for years, like smoke that never fully cleared. The woman noticed his change. "What is it?" He swallowed. "That's the man who owned me." Her eyes widened. "You're sure? I'd know that voice in hell." They slipped closer, crouching behind a barrel stacked with broken tools. Through a gap in the stone wall, the cowboy saw inside. 4 men stood around the forge, and in the center, a 5th, older, dressed too fine for this place. His hair silver, his boots clean. On the table beside him lay branding irons, still red-hot. And bound to a post near the fire, beaten but alive, was the sister. Her head hung low, hair matted with blood. When she lifted her face to the light, her eyes burned defiant. The woman gasped softly. "She's alive." The cowboy caught her wrist before she could move. "Not yet. We wait." The silver-haired man turned, holding up one of the irons. "You see this mark," he said to the men around him. "It's more than ownership. It's memory. Flesh forgets. Iron doesn't. We brand and the land remembers who owes what." He pressed the iron against a plank of wood, the hiss filling the room. The serpent glowed deep red before fading black. The sister spat blood at his boots. "You call that justice?" He smiled faintly. "I call it order." The cowboy's grip tightened on his revolver. Every nerve screamed to move, to end it now. But timing was everything. He waited until the silver-haired man turned to place the iron back in the fire. Then he stood and fired. The first shot shattered the lantern by the door, plunging the forge into chaos. Men shouted, stumbling for weapons. The woman darted forward, cutting her sister's ropes with the knife she'd taken from the guard. The cowboy moved like a shadow, his shots quick and deliberate. 2 men dropped before they could aim. A third charged with a hammer, swinging wild. The cowboy sidestepped and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him sprawling into the fire pit. The sister fell into her sibling's arms, coughing. "You came back." "Couldn't leave you twice," the woman said, voice shaking. The silver-haired man backed toward the far wall, drawing a pistol of his own. "You think this ends with me?" he sneered. "You kill me, and another will take my place. The brand survives." The cowboy aimed. "Then I'll keep burning them down till it doesn't." The shot hit the man square in the chest. He staggered, dropped the gun, and fell against the forge. The iron toppled with him, branding his coat as he slid lifeless to the ground. The serpent glowed one last time before the fire sputtered out. Silence filled the room, heavy, uneven, alive with the smell of gunpowder and ash. The cowboy exhaled, lowering his weapon. "You two all right?" The sister nodded weakly. "He said he wasn't the only one. Someone higher, the one they call the collector. He keeps the ledgers buried near the salt flats." The cowboy frowned. "Why there?" "Because the ground swallows everything," she said. "Bodies, debts, names." He looked at the crates. Hundreds of pages, still unburned. "Then that's where we go next." The woman touched his arm. "And if the collector's real?" He glanced at the corpse near the fire. "Then he's next." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain again. Distant thunder rumbled over the plains, rolling closer with each breath. From somewhere beyond the ridge came the faint echo of a horn, low, mournful, and getting nearer. The sister's eyes widened. "That's not thunder," she whispered. "That's them. The rest—" He turned toward the sound, jaw tightening. "Then we don't have much time." He kicked open the forge door, moonlight flooding the room. "Grab what you can carry," he said. "We ride before the storm reaches us." Behind them, the fire caught again, licking at the papers still stacked in the crate. Flames rose, twisting the serpent symbol until it turned to smoke. And from that smoke, the sound of approaching hooves broke into the night. The horses thundered through the night, their hooves striking sparks on the hard ground. The storm had rolled south, leaving behind a sky stretched wide and starless, a mirror of black glass above the desert. The cowboy rode at the front, reins tight, the two sisters close behind him. The fire from the forge burned far in the distance, a single red heartbeat against the horizon. They didn't speak for miles. The sound of pursuit filled every silence, the echo of hooves, the faint blare of the horn carried by the wind. Whoever the collector was, he had an army, and they were closing fast. When the trail widened, the cowboy slowed. "We'll head east till dawn," he said. "Cut across the flats before the sun comes up. Once it's high, there's no hiding." The older sister nodded, adjusting her hat. Her face was pale under the moon, her eyes sharp despite exhaustion. "And if they catch us?" He didn't look back. "Then we make it cost them." The younger woman glanced at her, silent, still clutching the locket at her chest. The metal was cold against her skin now, as if the serpent inside it slept. They rode until the stars began to fade. The ground flattened, stretching into the endless white of the salt flats. The air turned thin and brittle. Every breath tasted of metal and distance. By dawn, their horses were lathered and trembling. The cowboy called a halt near a cluster of dead shrubs breaking through the salt. The sky burned with that strange pale fire that comes before the heat, beautiful, merciless. He dismounted, scanning the horizon. "No dust yet," he said. "We've bought an hour, maybe two." The older sister slid down from her saddle, wincing as her knees hit the ground. "That horn," she murmured. It wasn't just a call. It was a signal. He frowned. Meaning someone's waiting ahead. He looked east. The flats shimmered, smooth and silent, but the air wavered wrong, like heat rising too early. He raised his rifle and peered through the sight. In the distance, something moved. Dark shapes, slow and steady. "Wagons," he said. "Big ones." The younger sister's voice broke the quiet. "Then we've ridden straight into them." He didn't deny it. "Maybe," he said, "but they don't know that we know." They took cover behind the shrubs, such as they were, and watched. The wagons crawled across the flats, heavy, drawn by mules and horses black as tar. Each carried a tall iron crossbeam with something hanging beneath, cages, swaying like lanterns. The older sister shuddered. "Those aren't for cargo." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "They're moving people." The lead wagon stopped near a dry sinkhole. Figures climbed down, men in long coats, hats pulled low, their movements disciplined. One man stood apart from the rest, tall, his coat white instead of black. He held no weapon, only a ledger under one arm. "That him," the woman whispered. "Has to be," he said. "The collector." They watched as the white-coated man opened the ledger and read aloud, his voice carrying faintly on the wind. With each name spoken, one of the men at the cages struck a hammer against the bars. The sound echoed like a tolling bell. The cowboy's stomach turned. "He's reading their debts out loud," he said, "making them listen." The younger sister gripped his arm. "We have to stop him." He studied the numbers, the wagons, the rifles, the open plain. "Not yet," he said. "There's too many." "Then what?" "We wait for dark again. Hit them when they stop to camp." The older sister shook her head. "He's not going to camp. Look." The collector closed the ledger and gestured toward the sinkhole. Two men hauled a crate to the edge and tipped it over. Papers spilled out, contracts, records, names, and the wind took them. Then came the oil, the spark, and the fire that ate everything written. The younger woman gasped. "He's erasing the debts." "No," the cowboy said. "He's erasing the evidence." They watched the fire spread. The papers curled and burned, drifting into the pale air like dying birds. The collector watched it all in silence, his expression calm, almost reverent. When the last flame died, he closed the ledger and turned toward the west, where the rising sun bled through the clouds. The men hitched the wagons again and began to move, slow, deliberate, toward the mountains that bordered the flats. The cowboy stood. "If he makes it to the pass, we'll never find him again." The sisters rose beside him. The younger touched his sleeve. "Then we can't let him," he nodded. "We cut across the flats, take the ridge before he does. From there, we end it." The older sister checked her rifle. "End it how?" He looked at the horizon where the wagons crept forward like insects in the light. "By taking what he worships most." "And what's that?" He met her eyes. "Control." They mounted up again, the horses restless beneath them. The heat was rising fast now, waves shimmering off the salt like glass. Sweat stung his eyes as they rode, keeping low, cutting diagonally toward the ridge. Behind them, the wind carried faint echoes, the horn again, and something else. A sound like chains rattling in time with the hooves. The younger sister looked back. "They're moving faster. Then so do we." They urged the horses on, the sun climbing higher, the flats gleaming white as bone. Ahead, the ridge rose like the spine of a buried beast. By the time they reached the first rocks, the wagons had veered closer, their line turning east. The collector rode at the head now, his white coat bright against the earth. Even at this distance, the cowboy could feel the man's gaze sweeping the horizon, as if he already knew who watched him. The cowboy drew his revolver and checked the remaining bullets. "3 shots," he said. "Make 'em matter." The women nodded. They dismounted, leading the horses behind cover. Below them, the collector stopped his horse. The wind caught his coat, making it flare like wings. He turned his face toward the ridge, and though the distance was great, his voice carried clear and cold. "Bring me what's mine." The cowboy's blood ran cold. The words weren't a command to his men. They were directed at the woman beside him. The locket at her chest grew warm. She looked down, eyes wide, as the wax seal cracked open. Inside, the serpent emblem shifted, as if alive, and a faint light pulsed from within. The cowboy grabbed her hand, snapping it shut. "Don't look at it." But it was too late. The pulse glowed through her skin, bright as fire. The collector smiled below, raising his hand in greeting. "Welcome home, my debt." The light from the locket pulsed brighter, until it was no longer the desert that glowed, but her, the woman herself, trembling as if the heat of the flats had moved inside her veins. The cowboy tore it from her grasp and threw it into the sand, where it hissed and smoked, the serpent's shape writhing in molten wax. She fell to her knees, clutching her chest. "What did he do to me?" The older sister knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "He marked you before birth," she said. "You were the bond itself, not the debt, the payment." The cowboy stared down at the locket, its glow fading to ember. "He's calling her back," he muttered. "That thing's his tether." Below on the flats, the collector raised his hand. At the gesture, his riders spread out in a slow, perfect arc. They weren't chasing anymore, they were closing in. "Mount up," the cowboy said. "We move for the ridge." The sisters obeyed, though the younger swayed in the saddle, pale as chalk. The wind had shifted east, dry and strong, carrying the smell of salt and iron. Behind them, the sound of the wagons changed. The creak of wood replaced by something heavier, deliberate, chains dragging. They rode hard. The ridge loomed ahead, jagged and high, casting a long shadow across the white plain. The cowboy could feel the horses straining beneath them, every muscle stretched thin. He didn't look back until they reached the slope. The sight froze him. The wagons had stopped, forming a circle around the collector. The men had dismounted. In the center, the ground itself seemed to move, cracking open, releasing clouds of dust that shimmered like smoke. The collector stood over it, one hand raised, as if directing the earth to breathe. The older sister followed his gaze. "What is he doing?" "Digging," the cowboy said grimly. "He's unearthing what was buried." They reached the top of the ridge, just as the first echo of chanting rose from below, a low, rhythmic murmur, too even to be random. It rolled across the flats like thunder in a cave. The younger woman covered her ears. "Make it stop," she whispered. "I can hear him inside my head." The cowboy dismounted and took her by the hand. "Stay with me. He can't reach you if you don't listen." She looked up, eyes wide, desperate. "You don't understand. He already owns part of me." The older sister stepped between them, her voice trembling but steady. "Not anymore. Not while I'm breathing." She turned to the cowboy. "We make our stand here." He glanced at the slope behind them, a narrow path leading to a line of boulders, sharp and defensible. "We'll hold till night," he said. "If we can't stop him, we bury the ledgers ourselves." They dismounted, tethering the horses behind the rocks. The cowboy took position at the edge, rifle braced, watching the riders below reorganize. The collector mounted his own horse, pale coat gleaming, and began the slow ascent toward them. The sisters crouched close, preparing the small cache of dynamite sticks the older one had salvaged from the forge. "We'll use these to block the path if they breach the slope," she said. He nodded. "Save one for the ledgers." The younger woman's hands shook as she loaded bullets into a revolver too large for her grip. "He said my name," she murmured. "Not the one I use. The one my father gave me. How could he know that?" The cowboy didn't look at her. "Because your father didn't sell his land," he said. "He sold his bloodline." The truth struck like a blade. The wind went still. Even the heat seemed to pause. Below, the collector's riders began their climb, rifles glinting like teeth. The chanting had stopped. Only hooves and breath and the slow grind of chains broke the silence. The cowboy waited until they reached the halfway point, then fired. The first shot took a rider clean from his saddle. The second struck the lead horse, sending it tumbling back into the line. Chaos rippled through the formation. "Now!" he shouted. The older sister lit the first fuse. The explosion tore a section of the path away, sending dust and rock cascading over the ascent. The shockwave echoed for miles. The collector didn't flinch. He raised his hand again, and the remaining riders halted as if tethered to his will. When he spoke, his voice carried through the smoke and distance like a sermon. "You can burn papers," he called, "but not what's written in flesh." The cowboy reloaded, teeth gritted. "We'll see about that." Another explosion followed, shaking the ridge. The ledgers they'd taken from the forge, what few they could carry, were thrown into the flames. The pages twisted and blackened, the wax seals bubbling into ruin. The younger sister stumbled forward, clutching her chest. "He's fading," she whispered. "I can feel him slipping." The collector swayed in his saddle, as if struck invisible. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The cowboy stepped beside her. "Whatever he took, take it back." She nodded, closing her eyes, breathing deep. The locket still lay on the ground where he'd thrown it, cracked open, ember dying. She reached for it. "No!" the older sister shouted, but it was too late. Her fingers brushed the serpent emblem. The glow flared, blinding white. The air around them screamed like metal splitting apart. When the light faded, the collector was gone. Only the wagons remained, their chains still swinging, the sound fading into the empty wind. The cowboy stared down the slope, the rifle hanging loose in his hands. "What did you do?" he asked softly. The younger woman opened her eyes. They glowed faintly gold, like the dying fire of a forge. "I ended the debt," she said, "or became it." The ridge fell silent, except for the whisper of the wind across the salt. The cowboy looked toward the horizon, where a storm was building again. Dark, slow, inevitable. "Then we ride before it breaks," he said. "Before it remembers us." They mounted their horses in silence, turning north, the sky behind them burning with the light of a second dawn that wasn't dawn at all. And from far below, carried faint on the wind, came a single, echoing laugh, the kind that doesn't belong to the living. The sun rose cold and red over the salt flats, painting everything in the color of dried blood. The three riders moved in silence, shadows stretched long and thin behind them. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed cautious now, whispering low as if afraid to disturb what the night had left behind. The cowboy led the way, his horse limping slightly from the climb. Every so often he'd glance over his shoulder to check the younger sister, still upright, still glowing faintly beneath her collarbone, though her eyes looked far away. The older sister rode beside her, one hand near her rifle, the other gripping the reins tight enough to turn her knuckles white. When they reached the edge of the flats, the cowboy called a halt. Ahead lay the remnants of an old mining camp, half-buried shacks, a rusted pump, and the skeleton of a windmill that turned lazily in the morning breeze. "This'll do," he said. "We can rest here a spell." The older sister dismounted first, scanning the horizon. "You think he's really gone?" He shook his head. "Men like that don't die easy. But what happened last night?" He looked at the younger woman. "That wasn't natural." She met his gaze, her voice quiet but steady. "It wasn't him that vanished. It was me that called him back." The older sister frowned. "Called him back?" "I saw where he went," she said. "Not just gone, buried, beneath the salt, like everything else he took." She closed her eyes, fingers trembling. "And part of me went with him." The cowboy crouched beside the cold fire pit and struck a match. "For you're still breathing, that's what counts." "Am I?" she murmured. "He's in me now. His voice, his rules. Every word feels written before I say it." The older sister dropped to her knees beside her. "Listen to me. You're not his property. Not anymore." The younger woman turned toward her, eyes bright with that strange golden light. "Then why does it feel like the world's still paying a debt I never owed?" The cowboy poured water into a tin cup and handed it over. "Because debts don't end. Folks just stop remembering who they owe." She took the cup but didn't drink. "He said I was the last mark, that once I was claimed, the chain would close." The older sister looked at the cowboy. "Then we break the chain." He nodded slowly. "Means going back." "Back where?" He pointed toward the horizon, where the salt met the sky. "The pit where he fell. If he's still down there, we finish it." The younger woman shook her head. "You don't understand. It's not just him. The ledgers you burned, they were only copies. The originals were carved, not on paper, on stone." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They're part of the land itself." The cowboy stood, jaw tightening. "Then we make the land forget." They rode again by midday, cutting south toward the broken cliffs. The heat rose in waves, the air quivering like a mirage. Every mile brought new signs, patches of scorched earth, skeletal remains of wagons. A half-buried emblem burned into the salt. The serpent again, its coils spreading wider with each mark, as if the desert itself wore the brand. By the time they reached the crater, the light had turned harsh and blinding. The pit stretched wide before them, its edges collapsed inward, forming a bowl of white dust and shattered rock. At its center lay a dark fissure, smoke curling from within. The younger sister slid off her horse and walked forward, bare feet sinking into the salt. "This is where he fell," she said softly, "but he didn't die." The cowboy followed, keeping his rifle low. The air here was colder, damp with the smell of minerals and something older, something like rusted blood. She stopped at the edge of the fissure and looked down. The smoke shifted, and for an instant they saw movement, shapes coiling, reforming. The serpent symbol, alive, twisting through the cracks like veins of molten iron. The older sister raised her rifle. Say the word. But the younger woman didn't move. No, fire won't end this. She reached into her pocket and drew out the broken locket. He tied himself to this. I can unmake it. The cowboy stepped closer. If you try that again, you might not come back. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's the point. Before either could stop her, she dropped to her knees and pressed the locket into the salt. The ground trembled. Light spilled up through the cracks, brighter than before. Wind roared out of the pit, pulling at their coats, their hair, their very breath. The older sister grabbed her arm, shouting over the noise. Let go! I can't, the woman cried. He's part of me. I have to take him with me. The cowboy lunged forward, catching her hand just as the fissure exploded with light. For one impossible moment, he saw both of them, her and the collector, intertwined, her body outlined in flame, his shape like smoke within her shadow. Then the wind reversed, slamming outward, and the world went white. When the light died, she was gone. The locket lay blackened in the salt, cracked open to reveal nothing inside. The cowboy sank to his knees, staring at the pit. She did it, he whispered. She closed it. The older sister stood motionless, eyes wet but unblinking. She saved us, she said. He picked up the locket, turning it over in his hands. Or she traded herself for it. The wind began to rise again, not violent this time, but slow, carrying fine white dust across the pit, covering the cracks, smoothing the earth. Within minutes, the serpent's mark was gone. The cowboy looked out across the flats, where the horizon shimmered with the coming storm. Let's ride, he said quietly. Before she comes back. The older sister hesitated. You think she will? He holstered his gun, eyes still on the horizon. The earth keeps what it's owed, and she owes nothing now. But the desert... He paused, almost smiling. The desert remembers. They mounted up and rode into the gathering wind, 3 shadows reduced to 2. Behind them, the salt settled again, pale and still, the locket half buried and silent, until the faintest pulse of gold flickered once within it and went dark. They rode north until the storm caught them, black curtains sweeping across the salt. The rain came hard, cold, stinging their faces like shards of glass. The sky cracked open in blue fire, lighting the world in violent flashes. The cowboy led the way through the downpour, hat pulled low, his horse fighting the wind. Behind him, the older sister rode silent, her face streaked with rain and grief. She hadn't spoken since they left the crater. They reached the edge of a canyon just as the lightning split the horizon again. The old trail wound downward in sharp switchbacks, a scar carved deep into the stone. Below, the desert shimmered with standing water, ghost reflections of clouds and sky. The cowboy dismounted and tied his horse to a bent mesquite. We'll camp here till morning. The woman didn't move. You think she's really gone? He didn't answer. Instead, he gathered dry kindling from the sheltered cracks in the rock and struck a match. The flame hissed, trembling in the wind before it caught. He built the fire slowly, feeding it like something that could break if handled wrong. When the warmth finally reached them, she sat down opposite him, arms around her knees. The fire painted her face in shades of amber and ash. I keep hearing her, she said quietly. Every gust, every echo, like she's calling from under the ground. He poked at the fire with a stick. The desert talks. It's got too much buried not to... But this feels different, she said, like she's not gone. Just waiting. He met her eyes. Then she's got better patience than either of us. They sat in silence. The rain softened to a steady whisper. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried, lonely and thin. After a while, the woman reached into her coat and pulled out the blackened locket. You dropped this, she said. He stared at it, surprised. I thought I left it buried. It wasn't there when I went back. She held it toward him. The metal was cracked, but faint warmth still pulsed from within, like a heartbeat muffled by stone. He didn't touch it. You keep it. She'd want it close. The woman nodded, closing her hand around it. The light dimmed, then steadied, softer than before. The cowboy leaned back against the rock, eyes on the dying fire. When this is done, he said, I'll ride south. Maybe find work along the border. You? She shrugged. Haven't thought that far. What's left to go back to? Sometimes going forward's the same as going back, he said. Just depends on what you're running from. Her eyes lifted to him, studying his face. You still blame yourself, don't you? He gave a bitter half smile. There's enough blame to go around. No, she said. You think every sin started with you. The brand, the blood, the debt. But you were just caught in the middle, same as us. He looked into the fire and the memory came back sharp. The night they branded him, the smell of his own skin burning, the laughter of the man who thought pain was ownership. Caught in the middle, he repeated softly. Feels like the middle never ends. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of wet sage and something else, something faintly sweet, like wild tobacco. The woman stiffened. Do you smell that? She whispered. He did, and he knew it. It was her scent, the younger sister's, carried back on the storm. He rose slowly, scanning the canyon rim. Stay close, he said. Lightning flashed, and for an instant, the world froze in silver. On the ridge above them stood a figure, cloaked in white, hair whipping in the wind. The light caught her face just long enough for him to see the eyes, gold, burning from within. She's alive, the woman breathed. The figure raised a hand, not in greeting, in warning. Thunder rolled, swallowing her words, but her lips moved. The cowboy could make out only fragments. It's not over. It remembers. Then the light vanished. The ridge was empty again. The older sister stumbled back, voice breaking. Tell me you saw that. He nodded slowly. I saw. The rain thickened again, pounding the fire into steam. The canyon filled with the roar of water rushing through the gullies. She's not dead, the woman said, trembling. She's part of it now. He turned to her, jaw set. Then the debt's still open. What do we do? He watched the fire die completely, smoke curling upward like the last prayer of the night. We ride at dawn, he said. If the land remembers her, then it remembers him too. Somewhere out there he's waiting. Lightning struck again, closer this time. The sound shook the canyon walls, and for a heartbeat the ground itself seemed to pulse with gold light, the same hue that had burned in the woman's eyes. The cowboy stared into the storm. You hear that, he said quietly. The woman frowned. What? He holstered his revolver and began saddling his horse. The desert, he said. It's breathing again. As they rode out into the rain, the wind carried faint echoes across the flats, chains clinking, whispers threading through the thunder, and somewhere beneath it all, a heartbeat that refused to fade. The storm swallowed the horizon, turning the world to iron and ash. Rain lashed sideways, carried by winds that screamed across the flats. The cowboy could barely see 10 yards ahead, but he didn't need to. The storm wasn't chasing them anymore. It was circling, alive, like something with intent. The woman rode behind him, clutching the reins with numb hands. Her coat whipped around her legs, soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. Every thunderclap seemed to echo with the same rhythm. 1, 2, pause, then a third, softer, almost like a heartbeat. He stopped suddenly. The sound wasn't thunder. It was coming from beneath the ground. Dismount, he shouted. His voice was nearly swallowed by the wind. Now! They hit the ground just as lightning tore the sky apart. The light illuminated the flats, and for one terrible instant, the surface of the earth seemed to move, shifting, cracking, breathing. The woman stared, wide-eyed. She's under there, isn't she? He nodded, his jaw tight. Or something wearing her skin. The rain thinned for a moment, and in that brief silence, they heard it clearly. A voice carried through the storm, soft but unmistakable. You shouldn't have come back. The cowboy turned slowly. A figure was walking toward them, barefoot, her dress trailing wet salt behind her. Her hair clung to her face, and her eyes glowed faint gold in the dim light. The woman gasped. It's her. He stepped forward, revolver raised. Don't move. The figure smiled faintly. Still protecting what's already gone. You never learn. The voice was hers, but it wasn't. It carried an echo, a second tone that rasped beneath it, like iron dragged over stone. "What did he do to you?" the woman asked, tears cutting through the rain on her face. The figure tilted her head. "He didn't do anything. I let him in. Someone had to hold the mark." The cowboy lowered his gun slightly. "You closed the debt." "I became it," she said. "Now it needs balance." He stepped closer, the mud sucking at his boots. "Then let me pay it." The figure's expression softened, almost pitying. "It's not your name on the ledger, cowboy. It's hers." The woman flinched. "Mine?" The figure nodded slowly. "The bloodline doesn't end with one. You're the last of it. The land remembers." The cowboy turned to her. "Don't listen. It's still him talking through her." But the younger sister, whatever she was now, shook her head. "He's gone. I burned him out. What's left is mine." Another flash of lightning split the sky. Behind her, the ground erupted, great cracks splitting open, light spilling upward like molten gold. From those fissures, black smoke poured, twisting into shapes that writhed and clawed at the air. The cowboy fired, the shot cracking through the storm. The bullet passed through her without slowing, hitting nothing. She smiled. "You still think iron fixes everything?" "Worked once," he said grimly. "Might work again." The woman stepped between them. "Stop! She's still my sister." The wind screamed louder. The glowing fissures spread, encircling them. The younger sister raised her hand, and the rain stopped mid-air, each drop suspended, glittering like glass. "You don't understand," she said. "The brand wasn't just a mark. It was a promise. Someone had to keep it. Someone always does." The cowboy met her gaze, steady. "Then let me take it." She looked at him for a long time. "You'd carry this curse?" He holstered his gun. "Better me than you." The golden light flickered in her eyes. "You always said debts don't end." "I lied." For a moment, she hesitated. The wind died, the air thick with silence. Then she stepped forward and pressed her palm against his chest. The warmth spread instantly, searing, but not painful, more like light pouring through cracks too small to hold it. Her voice trembled. "You can't just erase it. You have to understand it." He didn't move. "Then show me." The world flashed white. For an instant, he saw everything, every name the collector had taken, every life bought, sold, and forgotten. He saw the serpent's coils stretch across generations, feeding on obedience and fear. And then he saw her, the woman, standing before him not as human, but as light itself, burning brighter than the storm. When he opened his eyes, the rain had stopped. The fissures were gone. The younger sister lay in the mud, eyes closed, her face peaceful. The glow had faded completely. The woman knelt beside her, sobbing quietly. "She's gone." The cowboy crouched down and brushed the wet hair from the girl's face. "No," he said softly. "She's free." The wind shifted again, carrying a scent of sage and dust. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled one last time, distant, fading. He stood, helped the woman to her feet, and looked east, where the first pale light of morning broke over the flats. "Let's go," he said. She nodded, still trembling. "Where?" He gave a faint smile. "Where debts end." They rode out slowly, leaving the crater and its silence behind. As the sun climbed, the flats shimmered gold, and the wind whispered through the salt, low and gentle, almost a lullaby. Behind them, buried beneath the earth, the serpent's brand cooled at last, the metal dark and still. But in its center, faint and flickering, a new light pulsed once, then went out forever. The canyon walls glowed faintly orange as the sun climbed higher, dust motes dancing like sparks in the morning light. The cowboy dismounted, boots crunching on the salt and sand, eyes scanning the horizon where the ridge had swallowed the collector and the serpent's brand. Silence hung heavy, the kind that presses on lungs and makes the heartbeat loud. The younger sister followed, still pale but walking steadily now. She carried the locket, blackened and cracked, in one hand, fingers white from gripping it so tightly. The older sister trailed slightly behind, rifle slung but relaxed, eyes searching the distant flats as if expecting the next threat. The cowboy approached the edge of the ridge where the crater had been. His shadow stretched long, merging with the folds of earth below. He knelt, running a hand along the cracked ground where the light of the serpent had once pulsed. Dust rose beneath his fingers. "All debts end somewhere," he muttered. The younger sister stepped beside him. "Did it really end?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes traced the scars on the earth, imagining the way the collector had moved, imagining the cries and the pain and the weight of all those names carried in ink and iron. Then he looked at her, steady and unwavering. "Not completely," he said, "but enough." She nodded, uncertain, then turned the locket over in her hand. "What do I do with this now?" "Keep it," he said. "It's a reminder, not of him, but of what you survived, and what you became." She glanced at him, her face shadowed by the morning sun. "I was never just me, was I?" He shook his head. "No. And that's why you're still here." The older sister moved forward, placing a hand on her sibling's shoulder. "We finish what started, together." They walked slowly toward the flat that stretched beyond the crater, the wind now calm, carrying only the scent of wet salt and sage. The cowboy led, rifle at his side, senses attuned to the landscape that had once been both enemy and guide. Every rock, every crevice, every shadow reminded him of the night spent running, the night spent holding what remained of himself against the world. Ahead, a faint shimmer of light broke the salt flats. Mirage or morning? The cowboy squinted. In that gleam, he saw shapes forming, barely visible but unmistakable, the remnants of the collector's wagons, scattered, abandoned, chains dragging through the sand. The serpent's mark had vanished, but the imprint lingered in the landscape, a scar of history and power. The younger sister clutched the locket tighter. "It's gone," she whispered. "It's finally gone." The cowboy placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's never truly gone. The mark, the debts, the chains, they exist wherever someone forgets the lessons they carried, but it stopped hunting you." She looked out over the flats, the early sun reflecting in the salt, stretching light across the horizon like fire. For a moment, everything was still. Even the wind held its breath. The older sister spoke softly. "And us? What now?" He turned toward them, eyes glinting with the weight of countless choices made, countless chains broken. "We live how," he said. "We ride forward. We make sure nothing claims us that way again." The younger sister swallowed, then nodded. "Forward." The cowboy scanned the flats one last time. Nothing moved. No shadow, no rider, no echo of the collector. Only the wind and the memory of what had passed. He bent and picked up a shard of blackened locket from the sand, weighing it in his hand. "It's time," he said. He placed it carefully in the pocket of his coat, fingers lingering over it as if marking the promise of safety and memory alike. Then he mounted his horse, the sisters following. The sun climbed fully above the horizon, casting long, golden streaks across the salt. The flats shimmered in heat, but the air felt lighter, freer. As they rode, the cowboy glanced over his shoulder one final time at the ridge and the crater, the place where debts had been paid, where chains had been broken, where the serpent had finally been unmade. The younger sister whispered almost to herself, "Please take it off quickly." The cowboy exhaled and didn't answer. He knew the meaning, not the locket, not the brand, not the debt. It was the weight of the past itself. The past could be lifted, but only by hands strong enough to carry it, and only if you rode forward without looking back. They rode together across the flats. 3 shadows stretched long in the morning light, leaving the crater and the chains behind. Somewhere far off, the wind carried the faintest echo of metal against rock, a reminder not of fear, but of lessons learned, of debts faced, and of chains broken in courage and fire. The desert swallowed their path, but it did not forget. And as they disappeared into the horizon, the flats shimmered gold and white, calm again, carrying with it the memory of what had been and the promise of what was still possible. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a canvas of white salt and jagged rock, glimmering under the midday sun. The canyon and crater lay behind, silent, erased by wind and rain and the passage of night. The cowboy rode slowly, each hoofbeat echoing across the flats, carrying the weight of what had been done and what had been survived. Beside him, The two sisters followed, riding side by side, the younger clutching the blackened locket as if it contained every memory of pain, triumph and liberation all at once. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth, and with it, the memory of the serpent, the mark that had once hunted them, that had bound them in fear and chains. It was gone now, reduced to ash, but the lessons it left were indelible. That power can be stolen and reclaimed, that courage is tested in moments of terror, and that freedom is earned not in the absence of threat, but in the act of facing it. They rode through the flats, the sun climbing higher, shadows shrinking, reflecting the cleansing of night's darkness. Every step of their journey felt deliberate, a reclamation of their bodies and wills, a silent defiance against the weight of debts not of their making. The desert itself seemed to acknowledge their passage, sand smoothed, dust settled, and even the jagged rocks looked less hostile in the golden light. The younger sister finally spoke, voice quiet but firm. "I feel, sir, lighter. Not free entirely, but not haunted." She looked toward the horizon, eyes scanning the expanse where they had faced death, chains, and the collector's power. "I can breathe again." The cowboy nodded, feeling a similar release, though his chest remained heavy with memories of those he couldn't save, those he had lost along the way. "Breath is the first step," he said. "The rest is what we do with it." The older sister's gaze lingered on the locket, now inert, the serpent cracked and cold. "We can rebuild," she said softly. "Whatever they tried to take, we can claim for ourselves. And for those who never had a chance." The three of them rode onward, leaving the crater and the ridge behind. The sun reflected off the salt flats in a blinding white that felt like absolution, the world stretching infinite, unclaimed, and theirs to navigate. Every mile, every turn, every shadow passed by became part of the story of chains broken, of debts faced, and of courage that refused to bow to fear. By the time the first hills of the horizon rose, their shadows merged and lengthened, symbols of the unity forged in fire, blood, and relentless determination. They had survived what seemed impossible, but more importantly, they had survived together. The desert was silent now, not indifferent but reflective, holding the echoes of their passage, a witness to their triumph and their transformation. As they ascended the final ridge before the flats opened to the unknown, the cowboy finally glanced at the younger sister. "Whatever waits out there," he said, voice steady, "we face it the same way we faced everything else, together, without chains." She nodded, hands tightening on the reins, eyes steady. The locket, the serpent, the debts, they were relics of a past that no longer defined them. Ahead, the horizon promised new challenges, new paths, and new choices. But the lesson remained. Courage is forged in confrontation, freedom is reclaimed in defiance, and even the most fearsome debts can be overcome by those willing to endure the storm. The wind rose one last time, carrying the scent of sage and earth across the salt. The desert whispered as they rode into the morning light, leaving behind the shadows of the past, yet carrying forward the strength and unity that would guide them forever. The desert has many stories, but few like this, where courage, loyalty, and defiance collide in the harshest of lands. If this tale of chains broken, debts faced, and a relentless pursuit of freedom inspired you, then imagine what more awaits in the rest of our Apache Western series. Each story is crafted to immerse you in the raw reality of survival, the weight of honor, and the unexpected poetry of life on the frontier. Subscribe now and follow our journey across these untamed landscapes. Witness more tales of redemption, secrets revealed, and choices that test the limits of morality and courage. Share this story with friends who crave intensity and emotional depth, and leave a comment with your thoughts on how the heroes overcame impossible odds. The frontier is vast, the challenge is endless, and every new story promises heart-stopping moments you won't want to miss. Keep riding with us, because the adventure is far from over.